Yeah, okay, here we are. Welcome to Gunnar Weiskamp's web development. We're doing lesson 5 here, and it's going to be around Angular validation. In this lesson I should have a will in there. In this lesson we will look at how Angular can be used to validate data. In Angular there are many properties that can be used to do this, such as the ng min length, ng max length, ng disabled, and the required attribute. Sorry for the grammar. Along with the above, there are certain Angular attributes called invalid, dirty, touched, pristine, that will add in the validation process. So these guys here are certain attributes which will be added in, which will enable all the magic to happen. It's much easier to talk about and demonstrate when we actually do it in code. So let's do that. Okay. Alrighty, so I have been building this application since the first tutorial, and so anybody who doesn't know what this application is made up of, it's quite simple. It's just I'm working obviously here in Visual Studio. It's just one solution. We got one HTML page. Angular is wired into here, as we can see in our scripts folder, and that's where we're referencing it from. Obviously, when designing your HTML, make sure you're referencing Angular properly. There's my app, my Angular file, which is over here in the middle. And at this stage, we've got very little code. So to keep it nice and clean, we'll be adding the code very soon. Before we do that, with validation, I just want to mention a couple of points, or actually just one. If you're going to do some sort of submit form, make sure you have a form tag. That can sometimes be easily missed when people are new to this. They just forget that completely, put everything in a div and wonder why it's not working. And also, it's normally good practice to give the form a name value, which we will be using later on with certain of the Angular validation features. So let's go and grab that. Let's grab our first little demo here. Let's grab this code here. Right, with this code I just want to put in some simple code, not overbearing until we get a lot more code put in here, because that way it's easy to talk about and demonstrate and hopefully understand for you guys. So at this stage we don't have to put any code in our Angular file at all. Obviously we've got a controller here in which we're calling in here, but as far as the Angular script goes, it's doing nothing. For this I just want to demonstrate a simple first one text box. So we got this first name here. Now if we move across, we can see it's a typed text. This is special, it's given a name, first name, and we can see the use of the ng model here. It's also got first name. Now this is the special required attribute of HTML, which you can add into an input text box. This will make this text box required. So if you're going to submit, you'll get an error if you've not filled anything in. So that's how that required works. Underneath this, in this span, we've also got some magic here. I should have mentioned we're going to be demonstrating the ng show here as well. ng show, it's pretty simple to explain. It can hide or show something. If this value in here is false, it won't show this information. If this value here is true, it'll show that information. So that's how the ng show attribute works. It's quite simple in that way, but quite useful to use. So it's simple and useful. In here we can see already some other magic going on. This process here is going to be used to show an error name. So if we haven't entered in anything in here, this should appear up. This should be true and this should appear up. So when the dialog first appears, this should be showing. This is done through this magic here. So this is referencing this name, my form here. It then references this text box, and then this angular error object, excuse me, is referenced, and from that we get to the required attribute, and which is here. So all these parameters, all these parameters here, when the page first loads up, because it has no value in it, will equal true. So we shall see this. At least I hope so. And to demonstrate other facets of Angular validation, I've put this sort of code construct in here by using expressions. Because what I wanted to show, so when this form comes up, we will see my form, this form is going to be invalid. That means the entire form, not just that field. That will come up as invalid. Once I type something in here, in the first name, this will change its value to false or true. So these guys here are either true or false. All three are either true or false, but they represent different states of the form. So this one obviously state, if this form is invalid, that's what it represents. This attribute here, will represent if this first name is dirty. By dirty, that means if something's been typed into it. If something's been typed into it, becomes dirty, it stays dirty until the interface is refreshed. This guy here will say, will fire if the first name text box is pristine, as in not touched, never entered, nothing done to it. So normally it'll be, I get them mixed up, true or false when the form loads up. Touched, so we have here the touched attribute. This will mean if you've actually put something into the text box, clicked out of it, then this will change in its value from false to true, because then it'll be known as a touched object. But yeah, so that's enough talk. It is a little bit easier to demonstrate. Seeing is believing is what they say. So let's refresh this. And this might help visualize it for some people. So as we can see right now, invalid is true. This form is invalid, so that's true because we have not entered any text in there. Dirty is false because it is dirty. We haven't entered in any information. Pristine is true because it's never been touched, and touch in this case is false because we have not entered in any information there. Now to show that I find it a little bit confusing when there's so many true falses and true false, all that stuff happening there. Let's paste this screen over here and see what happens when we start typing in some information. Alright, hold your breath. Sorry, I just wanted to mention, so the NG show has come into play here as well. If we got two pictures there. I just wanted to mention this guy here. You can see it's working because where did we go? Yeah, so this guy here, well, you can follow my mouse, is working because we can see the first name required to come up, and we haven't entered in that information, so that's coming up right now. Now, if I enter something, you watch this guy, he will disappear, and these guys disappear as well. I'll just refresh that just to make sure we're all kosher. So here we go. There we go. So there's already a difference there. Let's have a look back at our original image and see what's changed. Ooh. Okay. Alright, so you can see obviously the first name moved. The first name moved. So because we've got information in there, it's all good. Invalid is now changed its value because the form is no longer invalid, so that's a good thing. Dirty. This has also changed its value from false to true. It's gone the opposite. because this we have entered in information in that text box. Pristine has also changed because now this file is dirty. Touched has also changed because we moved out of the text box. Touched is a tricky one because I'll just refresh it. Because let's just look at touch here. It's false currently. Now we go here, we enter in a value. See, touched is still false. That's a bit of a tricky one. Now if I move out of it, notice touch moves. So touched only happens once you've entered something in and moved the focus out of the object. Right, so that's the sort of, if we go back to the code, that's how these identifiers work. And they help turn things off and on when you're doing your validating. Okay, let's now look at a more practical example with a bit more code. So rock and roll, there we go, that's in there. Let's now grab some Angular code. What's an app without some Angular code? It's a sad Angular app. Now if we save everything, briefly talk about the code. This is the same. Now next, in here now we've got first, second, name, address, that sort of information. Second name, we're introducing something slightly new, slightly different. We're introducing the ng min length. All that is, the name sort of gives it away. You have to type in here, in the second name, at least 2 characters or above. Otherwise it won't be valid. And its corresponding validator is under here as well. So that's its corresponding validator. The address field, we have the max length, so it's the opposite of min length. So you can only type in 4 characters. If you type in more, it becomes invalid, and this should fire. Then we have obviously a submit button now on this one. We want to see if this works. So we want to submit information and then just see if some sort of process will work behind that. And to make that work, we've introduced this show valid function, which will be called in here by our file. This will cause this guy here to run some, we could run any code we want in there, put information in a database, etc., etc. But here we're just going to turn this to true to show across here our message that everything is fine. And saying that, we haven't got a message. So that's no good, is it? Sorry, I stand corrected. Here is a message. Data valid. So after here you do your database stuff, show some message to the user that everything's good and everybody's happy in the world. So that's the crux of it. Sorry, I'll just mention this guy here as well, ng disable. So this is quite useful because this is used to disable an object. And in this case, it's going to disable the submit button until the entire form is valid. So until you fill all of this correctly herein, you can't click that button, which is useful. Obviously, you want to tell the users what's wrong, and that's what all these error messages for. So you guide the users in, they finally fill out the form, hopefully correct, well, they have to fill it out correctly, and you get more valid data, which is the aim of most apps. Right, I will just we don't need this anymore really, that'll just confuse us I think. So I'll get rid of that, we demonstrated that before. Yeah, we'll put a space in here to neaten it up. And that should be it. Let's give this a whirl. Let's refresh here. Right, so first name is required. First name is required, so we get this error message here already coming out, which is good. Let's just enter a name, Tom. So now we've entered in our first name, data valid, which I was expecting not to be. But anyway, so it is, but let's just go with the second name. It can only be, well, it can be 0 or min length of 2. So that means D, not correct length. Exactly, that's what I was expecting to come up. We haven't put more than 2. Now if I put, so two or more, sorry. So now if we put 2 or more in, that's going to be invalid, valid, and we can again press submit. We can press it. But if we now put 1 in, you notice this is no longer, we can't click it, it's gone grey, and that's the whole idea of this validation process. So now let's make sure there are 3 characters in there, or 2 even, that's enough. Now the max length, we can only put a max length of 4 characters in. 1, 2, 3, so right now we can still press submit. That hasn't been grayed out, as we can see. Right now we can still press submit because we haven't reached over 4 characters. But as soon as we go bang, oh, we've hit our max length and we can no longer put that information in. We get the error message come up and we can no longer click submit. So that's the logic of it. In an ideal demonstration, you'd say Tom, you'd put in 1, oh, I can't submit it, oh, damn it. So, you know, that's no good. But now, you know, you put the second name in, Wills, or we, he's got a very short second name, and his address would be very short, 1H. See, that's already 2 lines, but hey, he lives in one high area, so that's not really appropriate address length. But that gets you the idea. Now at this stage, everything is valid. We press submit, and our show valid function here is called. This puts this to true, and this forces this message to be shown, which is held in this area here. So that's basically sort of a brief introductory to Angular forms validation. For me, the main thing that I've learned is always to remember this guy here, the form tag, give your form a name, and then reference it correctly in your validation. So go in the layers correctly. So you've got your my form, you've got your text box that you're talking about, and then you've got to go into this error object and then strip out what sort of error you're trying to find. And in this one, we've only got the required attribute on it, so we're just looking for required. You could put in here, you can double up on validation. You could ng max length, min length in there as well. So you can double up on validation if you wanted to as well. Alrighty then. So I hope that's given you some sort of information, and I hope it's been quite educational. But yes, next tutorial coming up soon. And I thank you again for your time, and do hope you have a pleasant evening. Thank you.